All right, let's dive into The Silent Patient, this psychological thriller. Seems like everyone's talking about it. And you guys have sent over a ton of stuff. A review from Crime by the Book, some New Note video instructions, and a whole bunch of opinions from Goodreads, too. Wow.
Yeah, looks like we've got a lot to cover today.
Definitely. So we're on a mission to uncover what makes this book so captivating, figure out what works and what doesn't, and most importantly, help you decide if it's worth a read. But first, the premise. We've got this famous painter, Alicia Berenson. She shoots her husband 5 times in the face. And then silence. For 6 years, her psychotherapist, Theo Faber, is obsessed with her case, wants to figure out why she won't talk.
Intriguing, right?
Well, the Crime by the Book reviewer says, hold on, they actually say we shouldn't call it a straight-up thriller, more of a character study. With a psychological focus, of course, so no crazy twists and turns. It's about slowly uncovering secrets.
Interesting. Makes me think about the pacing. The review calls it a slow burn, but was it too slow for some readers? The Goodreads reviews seem kind of split. Yeah, the pacing seems to be a big thing. Some loved it, called it unputdownable. Others, well, they found it a bit frustrating. And get this, the New Note video instructions, they really stress the importance of making the genre clear. Seems like a mismatch between expectations and the actual book can really make or break it for people.
Like going to a sushi place expecting pizza, right? Even if the sushi's amazing, you might still be disappointed.
You got it. So if you're looking for that fast-paced, action-packed thriller, this one might not be for you. But if you're into those slow, deep dives into characters and their minds, could be perfect.
Okay, let's talk about the character that everyone seems to be talking about. Alicia Berenson, the silent patient herself. The Crime by the Book review, they compare her to Alcestis from Greek tragedy. Calls her almost mythic.
That comparison really caught my eye, too. Alcestis sacrifices herself for her husband, then comes back from the underworld, silent. Makes you think, maybe Alicia's silence is her way of dealing with something terrible, protecting herself.
That's a really interesting connection. But did readers feel it, too? The Goodreads reviews. Kind of a mixed bag when it comes to Alicia.
Yeah, some found her really complex, intriguing. They thought the author did a great job showing her inner turmoil, even though she never speaks. I mean, imagine trying to show a character's emotions just through their actions and how other people react to them. Pretty impressive.
For sure.
Yeah.
But not everyone was convinced. Some thought she was one-dimensional even, objectified. They felt like her silence, which, drives the plot, actually took away her agency. Prevented her from being a fully realized character.
That's a valid point for sure. Goes back to that whole reader expectations thing. Maybe some were hoping for a more vocal protagonist. Maybe they wanted Alicia to take charge of the story, and her silence just frustrated them.
Makes you wonder if the author could have kept that mystery, that intrigue, and still given Alicia a voice, even a broken one, or one we couldn't always trust.
Totally. Reminds me of other books where characters are silent, but their silence speaks volumes, But they're not totally voiceless. Think of Offred in The Handmaid's Tale. Her thoughts, her observations, they give us a window into what she's going through, even when she can't speak freely.
That's a great example. It shows that silence can create suspense, but it doesn't have to mean the character loses their power or their connection with the reader.
Yeah, it seems like Michaelides was using Alicia's silence to symbolize trauma, that struggle to find your voice after a life-altering event.
And that brings us to the other main character. The one who does have a voice, maybe even a bit too much. Theo Faber, the therapist, determined to break Alicia's silence. But the Crime by the Book reviewer, they suggest he might have some secrets of his own.
Classic, unreliable narrator, right? Think we can trust them, but they might be twisting the story, our perception, to serve their own ends. And the reviewer mentions that we learn about Theo's personal life alongside Alicia's. Makes you wonder, how much of what we read is colored by his own biases and motivations?
So it's not just about solving Alicia's silence, but also figuring out if we can trust Theo. Did readers pick up on that?
The Goodreads reviews are all over the place on Theo, which is a good sign, I think. Some found him compelling, relatable. They connected with his drive to find the truth. Others, though, saw him as obsessive, even questioned his methods, like he might be crossing some ethical lines in trying to get through to Alicia.
Raises an interesting question. Does likability influence how we see reliability? Maybe the author made Theo do questionable things on purpose to make us question everything he tells us.
Like a game of spot the manipulation, right? And speaking of manipulation, can't forget about that big twist, Crime by the Book. Can't stop talking about. They even compare Michaelides to a magician. for pulling it off.
Yeah, the Goodreads reviews are buzzing about that twist, too. Some were completely shocked. Others, they saw it coming. Makes me wonder, what makes a twist fair? Is it about the clues the author drops? Or more about the reader's intuition?
The reviewer specifically says it's a fair play twist, meaning the author gave enough hints for attentive readers to figure it out. But even those who guessed it, they seem to have enjoyed how it all played out, the suspense, like a magic trick. Even if you know the secret, you can still appreciate the skill.
Sounds like Michaelides found a good balance. Surprising some, rewarding others. And speaking of mysteries, let's go back to that Greek tragedy connection. The reviewer mentioned parallels between Alicia's story and the myth of Alcestis. A woman who sacrifices herself comes back from the underworld, silent.
And here's where those different reader reactions get really interesting. Did they find the parallel meaningful, adding depth? Or did it feel forced?
The Goodreads reviews are gold for this. Some loved the Greek tragedy element, thought it was a smart way to explore sacrifice, betrayal, trauma. They appreciated the subtle way the author wove it in.
Others, though, not so much. Thought it was too obvious, took away from the mystery, like the author was spelling it out for them.
Like some people want to find the connections themselves, have that aha moment, while others felt like it was being handed to them.
And that's the thing about analyzing books. There's no right or wrong answer. A book can hit people in different ways, depending on their experiences, preferences, you know.
Totally. Okay, so we've got the premise, the characters, the twist, Greek tragedy. But what about the writing itself? What did readers think of Michaelides' style?
Crime by the Book calls it immersive and hypnotic. Let's see if the Goodreads reviews agree.
Okay, looking at the comments, it's a mixed bag again. Some loved it, thought it was clear, elegant, engaging voice, good pacing, kept them hooked.
Others, though, they had a different experience. Felt the dialogue was too much, made it feel stiff, unnatural, almost like a script instead of a novel. They wanted more description, more thoughts and feelings.
And then there's Alicia's diary entries. Some found them insightful, a way to get into her head, understand her, even though she's silent. But others, they thought they were unnecessary, even distracting, broke the flow of the story.
Seems like the diary entries were a deliberate choice by the author to give Alicia a voice. Even if it's fragmented, maybe unreliable. But whether it worked or not really comes down to personal preference. Some readers want that direct access to a character's thoughts. Others want to figure things out through actions and dialogue.
Like some want a guided tour, others want to explore on their own, draw their own conclusions.
Right. And that's why talking about books is so great. There are so many ways to read the same thing, connect with the characters, understand the themes. It's subjective.
Speaking of subjective, there's one thing about The Silent Patient that sparks some serious debate. The portrayal of mental health. Crime by the Book doesn't really dig into this. They're focused on the plot and suspense. But the reader comments, they paint a different picture.
And this is where we need to remember. It's fiction, not a textbook or a therapist's notes. A novel can explore mental health, even raise awareness. But it shouldn't be taken as fact.
Exactly, like those medical dramas on TV. Entertaining, but you wouldn't go to them for medical advice.
Right. But even though it's fiction, how a book portrays mental health can still affect readers, especially those who have personal experience with therapy or mental illness.
And that's what makes those Goodreads comments so interesting. Some praised the book for shedding light on these issues, while others criticized it for stereotypes or inaccuracies.
It seems like the book really hit a nerve with people who work in the mental health field. Several reviewers who said they were therapists or psychiatrists pointed out inaccuracies, worried it could mislead readers or reinforce misconceptions.
That's a valid concern. A novel can take creative liberties, but it's important to think about how those liberties might affect readers who might be looking for information or even comfort.
Shows the responsibility authors have when dealing with sensitive topics. They want to entertain, sure, but they also need to be careful about spreading misinformation or harmful stereotypes.
So, for our listeners, approach The Silent Patient with an open mind, but also a critical eye. Enjoy the suspense, get caught up in the mystery. But remember, it's fiction, not a replacement for professional help.
And that's where those Goodreads reviews are so helpful. Reading different opinions, positive and negative, helps you see the book's strengths and weaknesses and decide if it's right for you.
All right, that's it for part 1 of our deep dive into The Silent Patient. We've covered the basics, the premise, the characters, that twist, and even touched on the whole mental health discussion.
But we've got more to uncover. In part 2, we'll look at a possible film adaptation, those casting suggestions from Goodreads, and dive deeper into the themes and literary techniques. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Well, not really back, since this isn't live, but we'll move on to part 2 after this.
Okay, so well, just now, we were talking about how tricky it can be to portray mental health in fiction.
Yeah, it's a tough one for authors. Trying to tell a good story, but also being careful not to spread harmful ideas or get things wrong.
For sure. But let's switch gears a bit, something a little lighter. The Crime by the Book review mentioned a film adaptation. Seems like there's already buzz about who should play Alicia and Theo.
Oh yeah, the Goodreads readers have been busy sharing their casting picks. Everyone's got their own idea of who'd be perfect.
For Alicia, the name that keeps popping up is Haley Bennett. Readers say she's got that ethereal quality, kind of haunting. Perfect for Alicia's silent mystery.
Haley Bennett, that's a great shout. She's so good at those nuanced, understated performances, saying so much with just a look or a gesture. She could totally capture that feeling of a woman trapped in her own silence.
Totally agree. And for Theo, there's a clear favorite too, Oliver Jackson Cohen. They think he's got the intensity, a bit of darkness, believable as a therapist with secrets.
Now that's interesting. Jackson Cohen, he's shown he can do both vulnerable and, well, a little creepy. Think about him in The Haunting of Hill House. He totally nails that feeling of someone fighting their inner demons. He could definitely bring some layers to Theo. That tension between wanting to help Alicia and maybe having his own agenda.
Yeah, he could totally pull off that good guy or bad guy vibe. That makes Theo so intriguing. It's like readers are putting together their dream cast, like they're the directors.
I love that. Shows how invested they are in this story. They want to see it come to life on screen. They're even debating who should direct, what the atmosphere should be, moody and psychological, or more fast-paced, suspenseful.
It's like they're making the movie in their heads, each with their own vision. Makes you think. Does picturing a book as a film change how we see the story itself?
That's a fascinating thought. When we start picturing the characters, the setting, are we adding our own interpretation? Filling in the gaps, maybe?
Like we're working with the author, bringing our own creativity to it. Okay, so we've got the premise, the characters, the twist, the writing, the mental health debate, even a possible film. The big question, is The Silent Patient worth reading?
That's the question, right? And with this book, the answer is not so simple.
No, easy yes or no, huh?
Yep.
Depends what you're looking for in a book.
Exactly. If you're into those psychological thrillers that focus on character, atmosphere over action, this one might be for you. Especially if you like mysteries, unreliable narrators, exploring the dark side of human nature.
But if you want non-stop twists and turns, maybe not the best choice. The Silent Patient is more of a slow burn, really digging into the characters' minds.
And remember, even though it's about a therapist and his patient, the way mental health is portrayed, that's been a point of contention. Some found it insightful, others not so much.
Right, so go in with an open mind, but be critical too. It's a story, not a medical textbook.
And this is where those Goodreads reviews come in handy. Reading different opinions helps you figure out if the book aligns with your expectations and what you're comfortable with. Kind of like checking reviews before trying a new restaurant. You might discover something you love, but you also want to avoid anything that might leave a bad taste.
So to wrap it up, The Silent Patient is a mix of suspense, character study, and psychology. It makes you question everything, think about the dark side of people, and face some uncomfortable truths. But it's not for everyone.
If you're intrigued by a mystery that slowly unfolds with complex characters, a narrator you can't quite trust, and some thought-provoking ideas about silence and trauma, go for it. But if you want something light, easy, or a thriller where the good guys and bad guys are obvious, maybe look elsewhere.
Before we move on, I'm curious, have you ever read a book where you thought you could trust the narrator, only to find out later that you couldn't? What was that like?
Yeah, I'd love to hear what our listeners think about that. Those moments when you realize you were wrong, those shifts in perspective, that's what makes reading so interesting.
Absolutely. It's like the author's inviting us to play along, to question everything, to figure out the truth alongside the characters.
Speaking of figuring things out, let's dig into some of the main themes and techniques Michaelides uses in The Silent Patient. One that really stands out is this idea of masks, facades, both literal and metaphorical.
Oh, that's a great point. The title itself hints at that. Alicia, the silent patient, she's hiding behind a mask of silence, right? We don't know what she's thinking or feeling, but then as you read, you realize other characters are wearing masks too, presenting a version of themselves that isn't quite real.
Exactly. Theo, the therapist. He seems like a caring healer, but his actions suggest something darker, more manipulative. Even the smaller characters, the staff of the facility, Alicia's art dealer, They all seem to be playing a part, hiding things, protecting themselves.
Like the author saying that everyone's performing to some degree. Putting on a show for the world makes you wonder, how much of what we see in others is real, and how much is just a facade?
That's a question that goes beyond the book, doesn't it?
Hmm.
It makes you think about our own interactions, the roles we play, why we do the things we do.
Like the author's holding up a mirror, making us think about the masks we wear and why we hide our true selves.
And that's the power of a good story. It can show us things about human nature that are true everywhere. Make us question our own beliefs, understand other people, see things from different perspectives.
Absolutely. Another technique that stands out. Foreshadowing and symbolism. Michaelides drops these little clues throughout, hinting at what's to come, adding layers of meaning.
A reviewer even compared him to a magician, like he's orchestrating the whole thing, setting us up so the reveal hits even harder.
Yeah, like watching a great illusionist. You know there's a trick, but you can't figure out how it's done. And that just makes it more exciting.
One example that caught my eye, the Minotaur. It keeps appearing in Alicia's art. In Greek mythology, the Minotaur is this monster, trapped in a labyrinth. It's a symbol of isolation, of the dark side of humanity.
That's a really cool connection. The Minotaur foreshadows the twist, but it also says something about Alicia herself. She's trapped too, in her silence, in the facility, fighting her own demons.
Exactly. And that brings us back to that Greek tragedy parallel. The connection between Alicia's story and the myth of Alcestis. It's not just a random reference. It helps us understand those big themes of sacrifice, betrayal, redemption that run through the whole book.
Like the authors weaving together symbolism and mythology, making a rich story with lots of different interpretations.
And that's what makes The Silent Patient so interesting to read. It's a puzzle. You're putting together clues, finding hidden meanings, and ultimately you're forced to confront your own ideas about guilt, innocence, and how complicated the human mind really is.
Well, I think we've covered a lot: the characters, the plot, the twist, the writing, the mental health stuff, even the movie. But before we wrap up, one last question for our listeners.
Love it. What have you got?
We've talked about how this book makes us question things, unravel mysteries, see uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world. But what happens when you finish the book? How do those insights stay with you? Do they change how you see things in the real world? Your relationships, how people behave?
That's such a great question. It's like the real impact of a book isn't just about being entertained or even learning new things. It's about how it stays with you, how it shapes your thoughts, your perceptions, maybe even your actions.
Exactly. Maybe you start noticing those little masks people wear, the hidden reasons behind what they do, or you start questioning your own judgments about right and wrong, the complexity of human nature.
And the books focus on silence and trauma. Maybe that makes you more sensitive to the struggles people face, even if they don't talk about them. It could lead to a conversation, a moment of empathy, even a change in your own relationships.
Like you carry a piece of the story with you, a reminder of the lessons, the questions it raised. And those questions, those doubts, they can be so powerful. They make us search for answers, challenge what we believe, engage with the world in a deeper, more thoughtful way.
It's like the book plants a seed, an idea, a question, that keeps growing even after you've finished reading. And as it grows, it shapes how you see yourself and the world around you.
Beautifully said. I think that's a perfect place to stop for now. We've covered a lot, but there's still more to explore. In our final part, we'll wrap up this deep dive with some concluding thoughts and maybe answer some lingering questions. So stick with us. We'll be right back. Metaphorically speaking, of course. All right, we're back for the last part of our deep dive into The Silent Patient. We've gone pretty deep, haven't we?
Yeah, from trying to figure out why Alicia won't talk to untangling Theo's whole deal, we've looked at this book from all sides.
We talked about the twist, debated how it handles mental health, even tried to cast the movie. It's amazing how much there is to talk about with just one story.
Shows you what a good book can do.
Before we wrap up, though, I want to go back to that last question we asked about how the things we learn from The Silent Patient stick with us even after we close the book.
Yeah, the best books don't just entertain you. They make you see the world differently.
Exactly. Maybe you start to notice those little masks people put on, the hidden reasons for why they do things. Or maybe you start questioning your own ideas about right and wrong, good and bad, how complicated people really are.
And the books focus on silence, on trauma. Maybe it makes you more aware of the struggles other people are going through, even if they don't talk about it. Could lead to a deeper conversation, a moment of understanding, even a change in your own relationships.
It's like carrying a little piece of the story with you, a reminder of the lessons you learned, the questions it made you ask. And those questions, those lingering doubts, they can be powerful, you know. They push you to look for answers, to challenge your beliefs, to engage with the world in a more meaningful way.
It's like the book plants a seed, an idea, or a question that keeps growing even after you've finished reading. And as that seed takes root, it changes how you see yourself and the world.
That's a great way to put it. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this thought. The Silent Patient is a story about secrets, about lies, about the faces we show the world. But it's also about the power of silence, about how complicated trauma can be, and about that human need to connect, to understand, to find meaning in a world that often feels pretty messed up.
It's a book that sticks with you, makes you think, challenges you to see things differently. And in the end, it helps you understand what it means to be human a little bit better.
If this deep dive has piqued your interest, we encourage you to pick up the book and go on your own journey with it.
And remember, everyone brings their own experiences, their own way of seeing things to a book. What speaks to one person might not speak to another. And that's okay.
That's the beauty of books, right? They spark conversations, make you question things, and remind you that there are many ways to look at the world.
It's been a pleasure sharing this deep dive with you. We hope you found it thought-provoking.
And until our next deep dive, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those pages turning.